Hello, okay, for those of you returning to the channel, welcome back, and for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, then thank you for joining me, and welcome to my spoiler-filled review of Alien Earth Episode 7, Emergence. Now, for those of you that have been following my reactions and thoughts to Alien Earth Season 1 so far, you will already know this, but for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, I've really been enjoying this show. And this is coming from someone who not only is a massive fanboy of the Alien franchise, I'm a big geek when it comes to the Alien movies, but I was also someone that was very on the fence about the entire premise of this show. Like, just from where the story, or where in the timeline the story is based before the story of Ellen Ripley and all of that, I just was very much on the fence, and I wasn't really sure how I felt about sort of the direction they were going in when it comes to this show, and how they may be sort of ignoring certain elements from previous movies like the prequels. You know, I just wasn't really sure how I was feeling about all of that. But what Noah Hawley has done with this show is, he won me over. Like, I'm on board. I have been compelled. I am immersed into these characters' stories and their journeys. I just love how the alien, the xenomorph, is being utilised. You know, it's being used as this kind of the catalyst or vessel to sort of explore these kind of much darker, deeper, grounded human themes. And in turn, kind of really sort of not only allows us to get immersed and be able to relate to what these characters are going through, but also elevate the horror. And I just feel like Noah Hawley has been, so far, knocking it out of the park. I feel like Noah Hawley has been just very effective at not only giving us something, you know, us fanboys, something that feels authentic to the world of Alien, but also something that expands upon the horror that I feel is very effective and feels like it belongs within the world of Alien, and it's given us something that is fresh, new, at the same time very much Alien. And I just feel like the direction in which they've gone and how they've utilised the xenomorph or the alien within this story, you know, allowing us to kind of explore these characters and taking that kind of very sort of dark, deep dive into the psychological aspect of these characters and sort of just exploring these kind of very real human themes. I just feel like it's done in a way that's very clever, it's very smart, and I feel like it works. But there's a reason why I'm sort of saying all of this right now, before I sort of jump into my thoughts on episode 7. And that is because, and I'm getting to it, I have loved the show. Right up until episode 6. I have really enjoyed it, and yes, I'll admit it, I fucking love this show. Like I said, you know, for all the reasons I've already mentioned just now and in my previous reviews. But when it comes to episode 7, first of all, episode 7 is the shortest episode. And I didn't even realise until it ended. And I was like, what? Like, where's the rest of it? Because every episode has been consistently around the 1 hour mark. Just short of an hour or just over. And I just didn't really think, I just didn't check. I've just stopped checking because they have all, you know, every episode so far has been around an hour long. They've been very consistent with their length. But I felt like it ended quite abruptly due to sort of how, or what we do actually get in episode 7. And I feel like it's the length of this episode that kind of sums up how I sort of felt about it overall, and sort of with the issues that I had with it. Unfortunately for me, personally, episode 7 was the first misfire in this season. It was by far, for me personally, the weakest episode. It was, I don't want to say disappointing, because there was a lot still in this episode that I liked. There was still a lot of moments and character moments that I really liked. But overall, this was the first time where the episode finished and I was like, oh, is that it? Like, that was quite flat, that was quite empty. And like I said, you know, it still has a lot of its moments and it still has a lot of scenes that I really liked, but overall it was just lacking anything that kind of really gave us any more sort of insight or exploration into what they are exploring with these characters thematically, or any progress which may indicate how these arcs may be resolved in the series final. And of course, yeah, the story does advance, but what happens in this, I say 45 minutes, I think it was around 41 minutes before the credits rolled. And that is, you know, yeah, we get some advancements, but for me, this entire episode was just getting certain characters into their place ready for the final. That's how it felt. It felt like an entire episode of just moving all the pieces on the chessboard into their places. You know, we get characters that go from point A to point B, ready, you know, for that final episode. And that's how all it felt. Like, you get some nice moments that I did really like in sort of within sort of these characters getting from point A to point B, which I'll go into a little bit later into the review. But other than moving these characters from point A to point B in preparation, you know, for that final episode, it just felt like the episode didn't really have anything new to say, or it just felt like the episode didn't really have anything to say. And, you know, just going back to the fact that, you know, I just don't feel like there was much progress made in regards to sort of what they are already exploring thematically with these characters that kind of felt satisfying for me. It kind of felt overall as an experience very flat, very unsatisfying. And yes, things happen, like I said. You know, whether it be Morrow and his, you know, Utani troops getting captured, or Boy Cavalier communicating with the T-Oculus and finding his new best, you know, his new favourite best toy to play with. Or, you know, you've got Wendy and Nibs and Hermit attempting to escape the island and they get cornered. You've got all of that, and things happen, but there isn't really anything kind of added to the story that sort of gives me hope that we are going to get a resolution when it comes to the arcs of these characters with episode 8. And it really does feel like this kind of like a stepping stone, really, where it's, you know, it's an episode that's designed to purely get these characters into their places ready for the final. And it was, yes, out of all the episodes so far within this season, this was definitely the weakest and sort of the least satisfying episode. And I haven't been disappointed up until episode 7. And yes, like I said, you know, things do happen in this episode, and there are moments that I actually really found myself enjoying, and I loved sort of how certain moments were executed and how they came to life. Like, you know, with the T-Oculus, for example, communicating with Boy Cavalier, and we finding out now that the T-Oculus, you know, could do maths basically, and just how that entire scene plays out, I just really enjoyed. But again, it doesn't really give us anything new. You know, we already know that the T-Oculus is extremely intelligent. And then you've also got the kind of the relationship, you could say, between Wendy and the Xenomorph. Now, so far, up until this point, it was working for me. In episode 7, that's where it kind of faltered a little bit for me. That how this relationship sort of, you know, how this kind of connection between Wendy and the Xenomorph kind of really comes into focus in this episode. It didn't 100% work for me, and a lot of that is due to sort of its execution and how this moment plays out, which I will touch on again later in the review. But we do get just a little bit more insight into that connection, and maybe how deep that connection sort of goes when it comes to the Xeno and Wendy. So even though we get progress, you know, we do get just a little bit more insight, I felt like it was still feeling quite light. Like, it didn't really give me personally anything majorly new that sort of advanced a lot of these character stories in a way that just felt natural, that felt authentic, or just felt satisfying. And I'm just hoping that maybe it will pay off, you know, the decisions and the choices that was made within the writing and just sort of how this episode came together. I'm just hoping that it will pay off in episode 8, because this is, you know, not the point in the season where I kind of really wanted to be let down. And I didn't hate the episode, by the way. I kind of really want to get that across. I didn't hate this episode, but I just felt like it really didn't offer me anything new in a way of how these sort of character stories were evolving. And there were just a couple of things in it that just didn't 100% work due to the execution of certain moments, which I will get into. So the one moment that kind of really stood out for me, it's one of my favourite moments, and that is with Boy Cavalier and the Teoculus, who's taking over the sheep. And I just found this entire scene, this entire moment compelling. I loved how it played out. It had there was a streak of humour within it. But it worked. I think it's one of those moments that on paper, if I'd read it before watching the show even, it would have raised an eyebrow. And I would have gone, oh, I don't know about this. But again, it's one of those moments, like many moments in this show, where I feel like due to its execution and how it's brought to life, it works. And I liked it. I liked the moment. I just I'm very fascinated by this creature, the Teoculus. And even though it's a moment where, we do learn a little bit more about this creature. Yes, we already know it's extremely intelligent, but we now know that it can do maths, and that we now, Boy Cavalier's got a new favourite toy to play with. And so there is growth, there is progress to certain characters' stories, but overall it just felt very thin. But yeah, that scene, that moment with the Teoculus and Boy Cavalier is one of my favourite moments. Another moment or aspect within this episode that I really liked is sort of just the whole story with Slightly, and how he ends up getting Smee to help him move the body of Arthur to the beach so he could take the monster, the creature, to Morrow and Yutani. And just this entire moment with these three characters and how it plays out. It's incredibly unsettling. It's very unnerving, due to sort of when you really think about who these characters are, especially when the chestburster finally, erupts or explodes out of the chest of Arthur. Again, first of all, it's a great moment. I think it's a very well executed chestburster scene. It's very graphic, it's very gory, but what adds to the horror within that moment, and again, this is what really elevates the horror in the show overall, it's the psychological aspect of these characters and what they are going through within these situations or the circumstances that they find themselves in. If you look at Slightly's reaction to when the chestburster comes out of Arthur, and the chestburster just sort of dashes into the bushes, and Slightly's main concern here within this moment is, oh my god, where's the chestburster? I need the chestburster to save my mother. It's incredibly unsettling because, you've got what is essentially a child here, the consciousness of a child within a adult form. And you've just witnessed something truly horrifying, truly unsettling, especially when you think about how it's happened and why it's happened. And then just sort of to see that kind of reaction to that. And to me, that was the most horrifying aspect to that moment, was his reaction to that horrifying scene that just occurred, with that creature bursting out of Arthur's chest. Probably the only human in this show, I think, that might actually have any sort of redeeming quality about him. It's just another moment in this show that I felt effectively taps into sort of the horror and the kind of those tragic circumstances in which, or situations in which the characters find themselves within this show. And that's been one of the things, or one of the elements that the show, or Noah Hawley, has been incredibly effective at bringing to life. And it's still here, even if this episode let me down, we've still got those moments here. And then you've got the very final scene with Nibs, Hermit and Wendy. They're about to escape the island, and it's an intense scene because you want these characters to survive, even though the character is making decisions that's kind of really making me think about how I'm feeling about this particular character, which is not a bad thing, by the way, because this is what the show, from a writing perspective, I feel is doing a really good job at, and that is challenging myself as a viewer. I care about these characters, but at the same time, the characters like Wendy and Nibs, they're sort of descending into darkness from a psychological perspective. They're kind of going down this rabbit hole, and they're making these decisions that kind of really question kind of how you sort of feel towards them because of those decisions that they're making from a moral perspective. And sort of these characters, due to these decisions that they're making, are going into some pretty dark places, you know, especially Wendy. And yeah, it's a moment that I liked. You know, it ends on a cliffhanger. I still couldn't help but feel unsatisfied, but it's a moment that I liked. It's an incredibly brutal and bloody and gory scene that had me grinning, you know, when you've got Nibs fucking ripping the jaw of that guard off, and it was like, fuck, whoa. But again, what kind of intensifies that moment is the fact that when you really think about it, this is not just a synthetic, you know, this is not just an artificial person, but there's a human consciousness inside that character. That's a child there ripping the jaw from that man, and it's just like, fuck, you know, it's brutal, and I just loved it. I kind of loved that entire moment. But it's also a very tragic moment. You know, I've been really intrigued and compelled by sort of what they've been doing with the character of Nibs, and sort of the themes that they have been exploring with that character. But where we end up with her, which it appears she's dead, I'm kind of hoping that she isn't, because I don't feel like her story has been fully resolved, which then plays a little bit into sort of the issues that I had with this overall episode. So let's talk about that other moment involving Wendy, Nibs and Hermit, where they are captured by the Yutani troops in this kind of like in the jungle. And it's a moment that I really, you know, there's elements of this moment that I really liked and really enjoyed, but there's also moments that happen or transpire within this moment that didn't 100% work for me. And let's just talk about what did work. And that is just the entire build-up to the reveal of the xenomorph up in, you know, within the trees. I just found it to be incredibly effective. It's creepy, it's intense. You know, I was a little bit uncertain at first how this was going to work or how they were going to pull it off, because I'm so used to sort of seeing the xenomorph within more of a kind of like an industrial sort of setting, you know, within sort of like this, within the sort of the walls of a spaceship or a colony, you know. And so for it to be in kind of a very, very real, familiar Earth-like setting, this aspect of the show was always kind of concerning me or worrying me about sort of how they were potentially going to pull it off. And I'll be honest, it does work. Up until a point, it does work. And I just feel like, you know, how sort of the hybrids are communicating with it. And then, you know, it's there up in the tree as the camera looks up. I just love how this scene was executed. First of all, I've just adored how they've used practical effects and stunt work within this show. It gives it that kind of the tangibility. It sort of just grounds it even more. It feels more real and authentic. And I just love that we've got a man in a suit performing a stunt. And just the entire shot with the camera and how the xenomorph comes towards the character, it's beautiful. Up until a point. And this is a moment that I both loved and left me going, oh, really? At the same time. Because I don't know if you, and this is where some of you might think that I'm getting just a little bit too nitpicky here now, but I just couldn't help it but notice this, and I feel like they maybe should have pulled away a little quicker, or I don't know, because I love the fact that they've got a man in a suit performing this stunt. I think it's fantastic. I absolutely fucking love it. And it just adds to the immersion. But if you watch this scene, and I'm going to do like a snapshot here, and I'm going to put it here somewhere to just show you. But the way in which the xenomorph lands on top of the soldier and lands on the ground, it's very clearly a man in a suit. Now, I've defended this show right up until this episode when it comes to the look of the alien and with it being a man in a suit. Like, I think the show has been very effective. I feel like the directors have been very effective at framing the xenomorph in the way that doesn't look obvious that it's a man in a suit. A lot of you are going to disagree with me on that. I already know that. But for me personally, every episode where we've had the xenomorph so far, it's work due to the lighting, the shadows, and how the camera is used or utilized. But this is the one damn shot in the entire season so far where, to me, it was just very obvious. It was very blatant. You know, it was obviously a man in a suit, just from the way in which he's landing on the ground. Like, you would expect a xenomorph, with it being this kind of really powerful creature, to land in a way that wouldn't look like that. Like, this guy is obviously kind of just landed a little bit awkwardly, and as a result, it just sort of takes me out of that moment. And that was just a little bit frustrating, but it still left a smile on my face, because I was sitting there thinking, well, no, Ash, you know, there's a man in a fucking suit performing a stunt. And it was great, right up until the shot lingers on him landing, and it's the landing part that just didn't work. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just being too nitpicky here. Let me know below. You know, do you disagree with me? But yeah, it's great up until a point. It was just a little bit too clumsy in its execution. And it's how this moment kind of concludes that I'm not 100% sort of on board with at the moment. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of was thinking about kind of holding off from doing a review of this episode until the final episode, to see how that kind of evolves and see sort of where they go with this aspect. And that is sort of the connection, that bond with Wendy and the xenomorph. Like, it was working to, it is working to a point, but I feel like this scene would have worked better for me if, once the Xeno have slaughtered Yutani's troops, where it sort of gets up and looks at Wendy, Nibs and Hermit, I feel like it should have just run off into the jungle, maybe dragging one of the troops along as he screams, something like that, to just sort of kind of retain the horror and sort of that sort of unsettling nature of the moment. But what happens is the xenomorph, and this is where it kind of, like, I'm going to sort of steal AVP Galaxy's title here for their review of this episode, and this is where it becomes How to Train Your Xenomorph. And it's like the xenomorph just sort of slowly goes up to Wendy, and Wendy pets it. You know, she's petting the xenomorph. And I don't know how I feel about this. In one way, if you really look sort of deep into that moment, it is unsettling. It is disturbing, because you do have this child in an adult body that's allowing this killing machine to go on a rampage and sort of slaughter these people, you know, and I get it, you know, it's to aid their escape, but it's also a child. And so this kind of, this connection between child and xenomorph, it's, you know, it's intriguing, but I'm not too sure how I feel at the minute about where they are potentially going, because we don't know. And that's why I kind of wanted to hold off until the next episode, because I'm not entirely sure how I felt. It's one of those moments that, when on paper, it would have, you know, raised an eyebrow, but unfortunately it's a moment that, when brought to life within the frame, I raise an eyebrow, because I'm like, oh, I don't know about this. I'm a little bit uncertain about where they might be going with this aspect of Wendy's story. At the same time, I'm still intrigued, because of kind of that dark descent in which the character is very obviously on. Like, once the xenomorph has killed Yutani's troops, there's that kind of reaction from Wendy where it's almost like she's getting a thrill out of it, like she's enjoying it. The same for Nibs, and it kind of goes, you know, it's diving into that kind of the vulnerability of these characters when it comes to sort of what they've been through and what it's done to them from a psychological perspective. So the horror is still there, really, but at the same time, I'm just a little uncertain with how I feel, and maybe it's a moment that kind of just needs to grow on me, or it's a moment that will work more effectively for me once we get the conclusion, that final episode, and just see where these characters end up, maybe. And Wendy's transition from admiring Boy Cavalier to wanting to stay, to then not wanting to stay and getting off the island. And I get why the character has made that decision, because of the, you know, the very powerful story that's going on here with Nibs and what her character has been put through. And so I do get it. At the same time, it doesn't quite feel earned. and perhaps a little bit too forced or clunky maybe in how this character has sort of come around to all of a sudden making that decision to want to leave the island. I feel like for me personally it's quite sharp. At the same time, I kind of get it as well. And so that is a little bit of a minor gripe I got there. And that, you know, that is with the kind of the character of Wendy and sort of how she goes from sort of wanting to stay on this island and admiring Boy Cavalier to making that decision. And I get that it's kind of happened over the last couple of episodes, but I just feel like at the same time it just kind of feels a little sudden as well. And I know, again, from people that I've spoken to, not everyone's going to agree with me on that, but it didn't 100% kind of work. You know, they're making questionable decisions and they're doing things that go, whoa, that's a bit nasty, you know, like unleashing the xenomorph in that lab. And at first it's like, fuck, that's brutal. But then, you know, I kind of get as well why she's been driven to that point. But it kind of plays into sort of that kind of little minor niggle that I do have where that transition maybe has happened perhaps a little bit too clunky or a little bit too forceful or a little bit too sudden even. But at the same time, I remain intrigued. I remain compelled by what is happening because of the journey that these characters are on. So it is. This episode was very much a mixed bag, really, for me personally. Oh, I just have to mention the score as well. I mean, that's the one thing this show has been very consistent with, and that is the score. I absolutely love it. There's a piece of music in this particular episode. It's just before the xenomorph emerges and sort of jumps out of the tree towards Yutani's troops. And it's a piece of music that took me straight back to Alien 3. It's that kind of high, kind of screeching sound. And it's a very unnerving sound, and I just love it because it reminds me of one of my favourite aspects of that movie. I absolutely adore Elliot Goldenfel's score for Alien 3, and I just love how the show is echoing sort of not just the aesthetic, but the sound of the Alien franchise here within this show that is incredibly smart, very clever, and very effective. You know, there's things I liked about it. You know, there's moments and there's character moments that I liked. You know, I'm still intrigued. I'm still compelled by certain characters' journeys and sort of the path that they're currently on. And, you know, even though I didn't feel like we were really going anywhere satisfying when it came to sort of what they're exploring with these characters thematically, you know, it does worry me a little about how these characters' arcs are sort of going to conclude, you know, in episode 8, and sort of are they going to land what I feel like so far, well, before episode 7, you know, are they going to really land what they've been setting up here and exploring within this story? And it does make me wonder that, are we going to get a second season? Because at this very moment in time, I feel like we might need a season 2. But it all depends on how they wrap things up, perhaps in episode 8, the final. You know, maybe it was always designed to be just this one season. There has been interviews recently with Noah Hawley where he has an idea for a second season, I think. So I am remaining a little bit hopeful here. But overall, even though there are still things in this episode that I liked, and it still retains aspects of the show in which I have been really admiring so far, overall, as a chapter within this story, it was the most disappointing chapter in this season so far. It literally just felt like this kind of stepping stone just to lead into, you know, its purpose was solely just to lead us into episode 8, and it kind of felt a little unsatisfying, even though it still had pockets of moments with certain characters that I did enjoy, that I did like. But as an episode overall, I mean, it's the shortest episode out of all of them so far. I'm not sure how long the final is going to be, but it does. This episode for me was a little bit of a red flag of where we might end up going or being with the final episode, and hopefully I'm wrong. So yes, enough rambling from me. They are my thoughts on episode 7 of Alien Earth, and I will be giving episode 7, Emergence, So yeah, they're my thoughts on episode 7, Emergence. But what do you guys think? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said so far? Then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews and TV reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit that subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. My next movie review when it comes to the latest cinema releases will be for One Battle After Another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm really looking forward to checking that out. I'm hearing a lot of good things about it. And you've also got my retro review of Crack in the World, which is on the way. I'm actually planning on dropping that at some point this week. And just another massive thank you to everyone that's supporting the channel, whatever it be liking, subscribing, commenting. It means the world to me. And a big thank you and welcome to those that have recently subscribed. You know, thank you for joining me on this journey. It will always overwhelm me that so many of you do want to follow just some random Welsh geek ramble on about film and TV. But it means the world to me and I absolutely love doing this. So yeah. That's it from me for now, guys. Thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be catching you guys soon.